Imagine a plant that quietly does the hard work for you. It reaches 10 feet down into the soil, pulls up nutrients other plants can't touch, grows mountains of leafy growth, up to 100 tons per acre, and then turns that growth into free fertilizer over and over again. No factory, no fuel bill, no annual cost. Decades ago, some scientists believed this single plant could dramatically reduce our dependence on chemical fertilizers. So why did it fade from mainstream agriculture? The answer isn't just about safety concerns or corporate influence. It's about what happens when a system built on selling inputs collides with a plant that gives everything away for free.
That's where this story begins. Meet Bocking 14. Comfrey isn't just another leafy green in the garden. It's more like a living nutrient pump. Every spring, thick, broad leaves burst from the soil, powered by a taproot that dives 6 to 10 feet underground. While most crops feed near the surface, Comfrey mines the depths, pulling up potassium, calcium, nitrogen, and phosphorus from layers other plants never reach. Each leaf becomes a nutrient-rich package grown from minerals that would otherwise stay locked deep below.
And it doesn't just grow once. Once established, Bocking 14 can be cut back 4 or 5 times in a single season. Give it 4 weeks after a harvest, and it's back, lush, dense, ready to be cut again. In British trials during the 1960s and 70s, yields were measured year after year, even on poor soil. An acre could produce close to 100 tons of leafy biomass in a season.
But the real magic happens after you cut it.
Those leaves are loaded. 2 to 3% nitrogen and up to 7% potassium, far more than traditional farmyard manure. Lay them on the soil as mulch, and within 48 hours they begin melting into a dark, crumbly layer. Because the leaves are low in fiber, they break down incredibly fast, releasing nutrients almost immediately. While other green manures can take weeks to decompose, Comfrey works in days. And the cycle just keeps going. No replanting, no purchased fertilizer, no tilling. Each year the roots grow deeper, improving drainage, breaking up heavy clay, and building soil structure from below. Over time, one patch can transform tired ground into rich, living soil.
Comfrey isn't just a plant, it's a self-renewing nutrient system. Its deep taproot acts like a drill, mining minerals from below. Its leaves act like a conveyor belt, bringing those minerals back to the surface. For anyone interested in true closed-loop gardening, it's hard to find a better model.
Unlike wild comfrey, Bocking 14 doesn't spread by seed. It's a sterile hybrid bred specifically to stay where you plant it. No invasive takeover, no weedy chaos, just controlled, repeatable abundance waiting for someone to use it. That someone in the 1950s was Lawrence D. Hills. Hills didn't look like a revolutionary. He was a young British horticulturalist living in post-war Britain, surrounded by rationing, soil exhaustion, and anxiety about food security. But he saw in comfrey something others overlooked, a plant that could restore fertility without chemicals, if only it could be properly managed. In 1954, he founded the Henry Doubleday Research Association, HDRA, in a small rented cottage in Bocking, Essex. His goal was simple but bold: prove, through real field trials and hard data, that comfrey could feed people and livestock without synthetic fertilizers or imported manure.
There was one big obstacle. Wild comfrey spreads aggressively by seed. Farmers wouldn't risk planting something that might overrun their fields. Hills knew that for comfrey to be accepted, it had to be dependable. controllable, safe.
So he began collecting varieties from across Britain, digging roots from old orchards and forgotten farms. By 1958, he was growing 21 different strains side by side on a 3/4-acre plot he rented for just £10 a year. The work was slow and unglamorous, muddy boots, careful notes, years of patient selection.
He crossbred vigorous Russian comfrey with common comfrey, searching for a sterile plant that would not set seed. It took persistence and ruthless culling, but by the early 1960s, one strain clearly stood above the rest, Bocking 14.
It didn't produce viable seeds. It resisted rust and disease. And most importantly, it delivered exceptional nutrient levels, especially potassium, the key element for fruiting crops. Hills filled notebook after notebook with yield data and mineral analyses. For him, this wasn't just about a plant. It was about resilience, about proving that fertility didn't have to come in a bag, about showing that the solution to soil exhaustion might already be growing quietly at our feet. He kept careful notes on everything: how quickly the plants grew back, how much each cutting weighed, how they performed in different soils. In the early days, most of the support didn't come from big institutions, but from everyday gardeners. Members of the HDRA sent small donations, pennies and pounds, to keep the trials alive. Many wrote letters sharing their own experiments with comfrey, echoing Hill's belief that everyone, no matter how small their garden, should be growing at least a little of it. By the mid-1960s, Bocking 14 was ready to step beyond the trial plots. Hills could have patented it. He could have protected it, licensed it, or turned it into a private business. He did none of that. Instead, he mailed out root cuttings to anyone who asked: backyard gardeners, small farmers, even growers overseas trying to restore worn-out soils. The HDRA's comfrey trials quietly became a cornerstone of the early organic movement. For Hills, this was never about theory or ideology. It was about proof. He wanted to show that an ordinary farmer, armed with nothing more than a spade and a small patch of land, could build fertility equal to the best manure, without chemicals and without unleashing an invasive weed. Bocking 14 made that possible. It stayed where you planted it. It spread only when you divided the roots yourself. And year after year, it delivered thick, nutrient-rich leaves on demand. To Hills, this wasn't just a successful plant variety. It was a resilience strategy, a practical way to rebuild soil and strengthen food security from the ground up, one root at a time. And the numbers backed him up. Lab tests showed that fresh Bocking 14 leaves contain 2 to 3% nitrogen, about 1% phosphorus, and potassium levels climbing as high as 7%. That potassium figure is especially important for fruiting crops. It's what drives bigger harvests and sweeter fruit, and comfrey supplied more of it than almost any traditional manure or green crop. Put it side by side with farmyard manure, which often struggles to reach 1.5% potassium, and the difference is striking. But comfrey's strength isn't just in its nutrient profile, it's in how quickly those nutrients become available. Because the leaves are low in fiber, they break down at remarkable speed. Throw a pile onto a compost heap, and within hours, the temperature can jump by 10 to 15 degrees. Microbes rush in, feeding on the soft green tissue. Even a sluggish compost pile can spring back to life. There's a reason gardeners call it a compost activator. While straw or grass clippings can sit for weeks before fully decomposing, comfrey leaves disappear in days, nourishing the soil and everything living in it. The same goes for comfrey tea. Steep the leaves in water and you get a dark, strong-smelling liquid feed that rivals many commercial fertilizers. Tests typically show an NPK around 2-1-3, often stronger in potassium than store-bought tomato feeds. The key difference? This fertilizer doesn't come in a plastic bag. It grows in your garden. Over and over again, the evidence pointed in the same direction. Comfrey didn't just match synthetic fertilizers in key nutrients. In some cases, it surpassed them. That wasn't something the fertilizer industry could easily overlook. At the same time, agriculture was being swept up by a different promise: speed and convenience. Synthetic fertilizers arrived in brightly colored bags, stamped with bold numbers and confident claims. The message was simple: measure, sprinkle, done. No harvesting, no hauling, no waiting for leaves to break down. Thanks to the Haber-Bosch process, developed in the early 20th century, nitrogen could be pulled from the air and turned into ammonia on a massive industrial scale. It required enormous energy, but it delivered reliable yields. By the 1960s, this chemistry had been packaged as modern progress. Agricultural advisors and industry groups pushed the comparison hard. Why spend an hour cutting and carrying comfrey when you could fertilize an entire row in 5 minutes with a scoop of blue granules? From a purely time and labor perspective, the bag often won. Advertising reinforced the idea. The future of farming was clean, efficient, predictable. Less sweat, fewer uncertainties, no quirks, no cycles to manage. Meanwhile, the quiet work of tending a perennial fertility plant began to look old-fashioned. Managing a living system with its rhythms and seasons was subtly framed as inefficient. There was no dramatic ban, no headline war, just a steady shift in narrative. As agriculture embraced industrial convenience, comfrey and its advocates slowly drifted to the margins. The story of farming was being rewritten around speed, scale, and simplicity, and in that new version there was little room for a deep-rooted perennial that asked for patience and a gardener's touch. In 2001, everything changed with a single decision. The FDA stepped in and ordered comfrey supplements off store shelves. The reason? They contained purolizidine alkaloids, natural compounds that can cause liver damage if consumed in significant amounts. The warning was aimed at teas, capsules, and concentrated extracts meant to be swallowed, not at the plant growing in gardens and not at its use as mulch or fertilizer. But headlines rarely leave room for nuance. Suddenly, comfrey's name appeared on warning lists. The word toxic began to follow it around, and in the public imagination, a trusted garden ally quietly transformed into something dangerous. Garden centers, cautious about liability, chose the safer business move. Rather than explain the difference between ingesting a concentrated supplement and spreading leaves under tomato plants, many simply stopped selling it. Comfrey disappeared from catalogs and nursery benches, not because it harmed gardens, but because explaining the distinction felt risky. There were no laws banning the plant, no penalties for growing it, no restrictions on using it as mulch. Still, the damage was done. A plant once beloved by organic growers became, in the mainstream market, something to avoid. To be clear, the science behind the concern isn't imaginary. Pyrrolizidine alkaloids can be harmful if eaten in quantity, particularly from roots or concentrated extracts, but in garden use, things look very different. When comfrey leaves are laid on soil, those compounds are quickly broken down by microbes and diluted naturally. No regulatory agency has banned comfrey as a fertilizer, and there's no evidence linking its use as mulch or compost to harm in crops or people. What suffered most wasn't safety, it was reputation. Comfrey's decline had less to do with what it actually did in the soil, and more to do with fear, simplified headlines, and a loss of context. For years afterward, it survived mostly in the hands of committed organic gardeners and permaculture enthusiasts, passed quietly from one grower to another as root cuttings and shared advice. Meanwhile, the wider gardening world moved on, leaving this old soil-building ally largely forgotten.
Yet, for those who still grow it, comfrey remains remarkably simple to use. The easiest method is known as chop and drop. Cut a handful of thick, bristly leaves and lay them right at the base of tomatoes, peppers, or berry bushes. No digging, no mixing. Just lay them down and let nature do the rest.
Within a couple of days, the leaves soften and begin breaking down, releasing a surge of potassium and nitrogen exactly where fruiting plants need it most. Because comfrey is low in fiber, it decomposes quickly. There's no long wait, no nitrogen lockup, no complicated process. Each harvest feeds the soil life below and strengthens the roots above.
If you want something stronger, there's comfrey tea. Fill a bucket with fresh leaves, add water, and let it sit for a week or two. The result is a dark, famously pungent liquid fertilizer. It may not smell pleasant, but it works. Tests often show an NPK around 2-1-3, making it richer in potassium than many store-bought tomato fertilizers. The difference is simple. This feed doesn't come from a factory, it comes from your garden.
Dilute it. Water it in at the base of fruiting plants, and you'll often see the payoff in better flowering and fuller harvests. And the best part? Comfrey isn't a one-season solution. Plant it once and it can keep producing for 20 years or more. No annual replanting, no recurring fertilizer bills, just a steady rhythm of cutting, dropping, and letting the soil grow healthier with each passing season. This is the kind of abundance that almost feels unfair. A simple, repeatable cycle where one plant keeps feeding your soil year after year, asking for little more than the occasional cut. Plant it once and it keeps giving back. In the UK, a long-time permaculture designer stands in a patch of comfrey that's been rooted in the same soil for more than 15 years. Every spring, without fuss or fertilizer, the plants surge back to life, producing up to 5 hefty harvests in a single season. He brushes his hand across the broad leaves and remembers when fertilizer used to be a regular expense. Now he estimates his small orchard has saved nearly £2,000 over the past decade. Each year, about a dozen bags of commercial fertilizer are replaced by one simple habit: cut and drop. Under his fruit trees, the soil says the rest: dark, soft, and full of earthworms. This isn't a theory on paper. It's a steady return, season after season. 100 miles away, an urban gardener tends tomatoes on a concrete balcony. Her space is small, but her system is simple. She fills a bucket with comfrey leaves, holding her breath against the smell, and chops them around her pots. The leaves break down quickly, feeding her plants right where they grow. When she needs an extra boost, she brews comfrey tea. It may not smell pretty, but it works better than most of the bright blue fertilizers at the store. Her fertilizer costs have dropped by 70%, and the proof shows up in heavy clusters of tomatoes. No synthetic feed needed.
At a community garden, a soil scientist explains why it works. Comfrey leaves used as mulch or tea contain only a small fraction of the compounds found in the roots, and in the soil, microbes break those down quickly. There's no evidence linking comfrey mulch to toxins in food crops. On top of that, replacing synthetic fertilizers with a living plant can significantly reduce carbon emissions over time.
One healthy comfrey patch can offset nearly a ton of carbon dioxide during its lifetime, compared to manufactured fertilizer. For today's growers, planting comfrey isn't about nostalgia for the past. It's about independence. It's a quiet act of rebellion, choosing to nourish your soil instead of relying on supply chains and rising prices.